You're useless, Layla. Absolutely useless, Ronan sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. I fought back the tears stinging my eyes, refusing to show weakness in front of his family. 7 months pregnant, I had felt a wave of dizziness wash over me and needed to sit down. Instead of concern, my husband's reaction was filled with disdain. Look at her, can't even stand up straight carrying my child. Ronan's parents, Mason and Layla, remained stone-faced, offering no defense. The rest of the family averted their eyes, an uncomfortable silence filling the room. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner, bringing the extended family together before the baby's arrival. But like most family gatherings, it became another exhibition of Ronan's cruelty towards me. Your grandchild, I corrected him sharply. Or did you forget I'm carrying your daughter? Ronan rolled his eyes. If it was a son, it might actually be worth something. Gasps rippled through the room, but Ronan seemed unfazed by his callous remark. I felt a sharp kick from my unborn daughter, as if she could sense her father's indifference. Mustering all my strength, I rose to my feet, steadying myself against the table. How dare you diminish the value of your own child before she's even born? Ronan barked out a laugh. Value? You've contributed nothing of value, Layla. I'm the one who built this family, this company. What have you done besides be a dead weight? His words cut deep, dredging up years of belittling comments and demeaning behavior I had endured. But this time felt different. A line had been crossed. As I looked around at his family's impassive faces, I realized they didn't see me as one of their own, just a vessel for Ronan's heir, at least until he decided I had outlived my use. That's when I caught Sienna's eye from across the room. My sister-in-law offered a subtle nod of solidarity, the hint of a defiant smirk playing across her lips. In that moment, I knew she recognized Ronan's manipulation for what it was, toxic and abusive. You're right, Ronan, I said steadily. I haven't contributed anything of value. I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. Not to you, at least. His brow furrowed in confusion as I turned my focus to the rest of the family. But this child, this daughter you've already dismissed, she is valuable. She's my future, a future free from any of you. The room fell into an uneasy hush as I mustered every ounce of conviction. I'm done being treated as worthless. My daughter and I deserve better. With that, I strode out of the room, the dull roar of Ronan's objections fading behind me. A weight had lifted, and for the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my own destiny. The path ahead was uncertain, but no longer would I accept being diminished and devalued. After years of allowing Ronan's toxic presence to define me, I was finally ready to redefine myself and show my daughter what it truly means to be a woman of strength. No more complacency or fear, only determination to rise above. In the days following that fateful dinner, I found myself questioning everything about my marriage to Ronan. His callous disregard for our unborn daughter laid bare the true depths of his cruelty and lack of empathy. This man, who was supposed to be my partner for life, had reduced me to little more than an object, a disposable vessel for producing his heir. But I was done being disposed of. That night, after leaving his vitriolic family behind, I had marched straight to the home office and began digging into our finances. What I uncovered shook me to my core. Evidence of Ronan's rampant financial mismanagement and deceit that spanned years. Hidden offshore accounts, falsified business records, illegal money trails, all carefully obscured. You lying snake, I muttered, poring over the damning documents. Just then I heard the telltale click of his study door opening. Well, look who's still awake burning the midnight oil. Ronan sauntered in, arf thinly veiled derision lacing his words. I figured you'd be too busy wallowing after your little tantrum the other night. My hands trembled with rage, clutching the financial records like a shield. You're one to talk about tantrums. Your own toddler outbursts have funded this. I shoved the documents towards him. Care to explain all this, dear husband? Ronan's eyes widened as he flipped through the incriminating pages. For a split second, panic flashed across his face before his expression contorted into one of snide amusement. Finally did some digging, did you? He chuckled darkly. I'll give you this much. You're not as big of an idiot as I thought. Don't play dumb with me, I spat. I know about the money laundering, the shady business deals, all of it. You've been lying to me from the start. Ronan simply shrugged, unperturbed. So, Those were necessary evils to get to where I am now. All you had to do was play the role of the devoted little wife. But you always did have trouble following directions. His brazen admission, devoid of any morsel of guilt or shame, was like a viper's strike to my heart. How could I have been so blind, so utterly naive to the depths of Ronan's moral depravity? You selfish, heartless bastard, I seethed, fists clenched. Did you ever love me at all? Or was I always just a means to an end in your grand game of lies and deceit? A cruel smirk played across his thin lips. Now you're catching on, but you're giving yourself too much credit, pet. You were a convenient accessory, a pretty ornament to adorn my winning success story. Nothing more. White-hot anger flooded my veins as the weight of his treachery washed over me in waves. This man didn't deserve an ounce of my loyalty or affection, not after everything he'd done, all the ways he'd betrayed and belittled me. And in that moment, I made a vow to myself and to my unborn daughter. I would bring this whole rotten edifice crashing down around him. Ronan wanted to see me as worthless, as nothing more than a means to an end. Fine, I would show him just how ruinous being underestimated could be. Rising to my feet, I met his cold stare with white-hot defiance blazing in my eyes. You're going to regret the day you ever crossed me, Ronan. I waved the documents with contempt. All of this is going to be your undoing. No more hiding, no more lies. I'm going to make sure everyone sees you for the soulless snake that you truly are. Ronan let out a contemptuous bark of laughter, seemingly unfazed by my declaration of war. But I could see the slightest flicker of uncertainty in those beady eyes of his. Good, the first embers of fear had been stoked. My path was now clear. It was time to rally my forces, gather my allies, and enact the grand unraveling of Ronan Jacob's carefully cultivated lies. The reversal of his ill-gotten fortunes was going to be deliciously karmic, and I would be the orchestrator of his downfall, just as he had been the architect of my dehumanization. The great game of revenge was only just beginning. In the aftermath of my explosive confrontation with Ronan, I found myself at a crossroads. His web of deceit surrounding the family business was so intricately spun, taking him down would require more than just my resolve. I needed an inside source, an ally with intimate knowledge to counteract his uncle's shadowy machinations. That's when Sienna entered the picture. My sister-in-law had been sidelined by Ronan and the family elders for years, deemed too headstrong and independent for their antiquated tastes. But her marginalization shielded her from their corruption, allowing her to see the rot festering at the core with striking clarity. I reached out to her a few days after discovering Ronan's illicit financial records, suggesting we meet for lunch to catch up. Sienna, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the weight behind my request. "So what's really going on, Layla?" she asked once we were seated at a quiet cafe, her eyes narrowed with cautious curiosity. "This can't just be a social call after what went down at your dad's place." Exhaling slowly, I pulled out the now dog-eared folder and slid it across the table towards her. "See for yourself. Ronan's lies run much deeper than any of us realized." Sienna's brow furrowed as she flipped through the damning pages, her expression oscillating between disbelief and anger. When she finally looked up at me, her green eyes were blazing with righteous fury. "That arrogant, chauvinistic prick," she hissed, slamming the folder shut. I knew he was a bastard, but this is a new low, even for him. A rueful smile tugged at the corner of my lips. It felt vindicating to have someone finally see Ronan's treachery for what it was. "You and me both. That's why I need your help taking him down." Sienna cocked an eyebrow quizzically. "My help? Why come to me?" "Because you're one of the few people with a frontline view into the family's dealings," I said frankly. "With your insight into their illegal activities, we'd have a better chance of exposing Ronan's lies and watching the whole corrupt edifice crumble." For a long moment, Sienna studied me appraisingly before letting out a bitter chuckle. "Gotta hand it to you. You've got a set of steel ovaries going up against Ronan like this." Her gaze turned flinty, burning with years of repressed resentment towards my husband and his family. "I'm in. It's high time that misogynistic prick got taken down a few pegs." Relief washed over me, knowing I had a co-conspirator, and a fiercely capable one at that. With Sienna's insider knowledge combined with my evidence, we would be an undeniable force to be reckoned with. So what's the plan? she asked, leaning in conspiratorially. How do you want to dismantle this cancer infecting our family? A feral grin spread across my face as I laid out my initial strategy. Lawsuits, information leaks to the press, back-channel communications to law enforcement, nothing was off the table. Like Jenga pieces, we would systematically extract the foundational blocks underlying Ronan's empire until the entire decrepit tower came crashing down around him. Sienna listened intently, offering insights and recommendations along the way. Our partnership was quickly solidifying into a potent alliance, two wronged women joining forces to enact poetic justice. You know there's no turning back after this, right? Sienna cautioned once I finished laying out my plan. Ronan's going to come after us, after you, with everything he has left. I felt my daughter kick insistently from within my womb, as if lending her strength and conviction to my cause. With a resolute nod, I met Sienna's gaze head-on. Let him try, I said, cold determination lacing my voice. I'm done running scared. It's time for Ronan to learn what happens when you back a mother into a corner. Sienna flashed me a wolfish grin, her eyes glinting with feral approval. Well then, let's make that bastard pay. And with that, the gears of our intricately weaved con were set in motion. Ronan's downfall was now inevitable. He just didn't know it yet. With Sienna as my co-conspirator, the wheels were in motion to demolish Ronan's empire of lies and deceit. But exposing him wouldn't be a simple task. We needed to lay the groundwork meticulously, shoring up our defenses while weakening his position through strategic strikes. Over the following weeks, Sienna and I became a well-oiled machine. She provided insider intelligence on the family's illegal dealings, while I leveraged my financial evidence to start building a comprehensive case against Ronan. Money trails, damning documentation, back-channel whispers to law enforcement, everything was falling into place. I also began lining up allies in preparation for the inevitable battle to come. Some were easy to recruit, like Sienna's younger brother Caleb, who had long resented Ronan's boorish behavior. Others were more hesitant, but the weight of the evidence against my husband ultimately proved convincing. This is some heavy stuff, Lay, Jen, my best friend since childhood, muttered as she pored over the paper trail detailing Ronan's fraud. You know he's going to fight this tooth and nail, right? That's the plan, I replied grimly. He's going to realize just how big of a mistake it was underestimating what a woman's scorn can accomplish. Jen shook her head in disbelief. I knew that asshole was a piece of work, but money laundering? Illegal business dealings? Jesus. Her gaze turned serious as she looked up at me. You sure you're ready for the fallout that comes with taking him down like this? He could try to take everything. Your money, the baby. My hand instinctively went to my swollen belly as I felt my daughter shift inside me. That was the entire crux of this mission, wasn't it? To ensure she would never have to suffer the same toxic mistreatment I had endured. To build her a life free of Ronan's poisonous influence. He doesn't get to decide what's best for my child, not anymore, I said firmly. If he wants a war, he's going to get one, and I don't intend to lose. Jen studied me appraisingly for a long moment before giving a resolute nod. Then you've got my full support. Let's take that bastard down. With more allies rallying to the cause, our efforts started bearing fruit. A scathing expose in the local paper cast scrutiny on Ronan's business affairs. Anonymous tips triggered preliminary IRS and SEC investigations. I could sense the walls closing in around him, his confidence gradually fracturing. It all came to a head one evening when Ronan stormed into the house, his face contorted into a mask of frothing rage. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? He snarled, violently slamming his briefcase onto the table. You had to go and poke your nose where it didn't belong. I stared at him impassively, cradling my pregnant belly. That's rich, coming from you. I'm simply bringing your shady dealings into the light. You conniving little bitch! Ronan's sudden roar made me flinch. You think you've won? That you can take everything I've built and destroy it on a whim? He closed the distance between us, his meaty hand gripping my arm in a vice-like grip. I'll bury you before you can take one more step, do you hear me? This family, this life, it's all mine. You're nothing. His spittle flew in my face as I met his crazed stare with steely defiance. We'll see about that. With a disgusted grunt, Ronan shoved me away and stormed out, leaving me to rub the spot where his fingers had dug into my flesh. I felt my daughter kick anxiously, as if she could sense the tension and rage radiating off her father. "Don't worry, sweetie," I murmured, gently rubbing my belly to soothe her. "That's the last time he'll ever get to hurt us." The game was afoot, the battle lines clearly drawn. There would be no turning back now. Ronan's ignorant arrogance had opened the door for his downfall. Soon, very soon, everything he'd schemed and clawed for would be ashes at his feet. And from those ashes, I would rise, his conquering phoenix, mercilessly guiding the path of his self-immolation. Despite Ronan's blustering threats, Sienna and I refused to let up the pressure. With our meticulous groundwork laid over the past weeks, all we needed was the right catalyst to detonate the explosive truth and bring the full force of our retaliation crashing down. That spark arrived in the most unlikely of places, a goddamn family event, of all things. It was one of those obnoxious high society galas the Jacobs clan used for thinly veiled vanity showcasing. A garish display of old money and entitlement under the guise of charity that made my skin crawl. Ronan, desperate to maintain appearances, had all but demanded my attendance, claiming it would soften the growing PR onslaught against him. So there I was, 7.5 months pregnant, squeezed into an uncomfortably tight dress and trotted out like some grotesque show pony, but to help resuscitate my husband's wilting image. The hypocrisy was galling, but I played along, for now. The night itself was a sordid parade of self-congratulatory speeches and pathetic social climbing, exactly as I'd expected. I found myself growing increasingly lightheaded and nauseous, thanks to a combination of my condition and the sickeningly opulent atmosphere. "Sienna, I need some air," I muttered, struggling to conceal my discomfort. "Being around these vapid vultures is making me ill." "You just say the word and we're out of here," she replied with a reassuring squeeze of my arm. "This whole charade is utter bullshit anyway." Nodding gratefully, I excused myself from the overcrowded ballroom and made my way towards the balcony doors, each step feeling heavier than the last. I was nearly there when a grimy hand clamped around my elbow, whipping me around forcefully. "Just where do you think you're going?" Ronan sneered, his tuxedo hanging open sloppily and his breath reeking of whiskey. "Your little disappearing act is going to make us look bad." I wrenched my arm free from his grasp, defiant anger flaring. "Us? Don't flatter yourself, Ronan. You're the only one with an image to protect here, and at great cost, it seems." He threw his head back with a contemptuous bark of laughter. "Oh, spare me the self-righteous melodrama, would you? I'm doing what's necessary to maintain the family legacy." "Your legacy is mired in lies and illegal money, you degenerate." I shot back, fighting the wave of dizziness washing over me. "How many more laws do you plan to break, just to feather your filthy nest?" Ronan's face contorted in an ugly sneer. "Watch your tone when speaking to me, you ungrateful whore." The vile insult was cut off as a searing pain lanced through my abdomen, forcing me to double over with a strangled cry. Instantly, the room started spinning sickeningly as I clutched at my stomach. "Oh God, something's wrong." I whimpered through gritted teeth, panic seizing my chest. "The baby. I think she's coming." For one infinitesimal moment, Ronan's scowl slipped just enough for the briefest flicker of concern to register on his face. But it was quickly extinguished as his mask of disdain slammed back into place. "Of course you'd choose now for this pathetic drama queen act," he growled, making no move to help me. "Just another attention grab like always." I could scarcely believe his callous reaction through the haze of agony racking my body. "Ronan, please. I need help." From somewhere behind me, I heard Sienna's urgent voice calling my name as she rushed to my side. "Layla! Oh my God! What's going on?" Her eyes went wide with panic as she quickly assessed the situation. "We need to get you to a hospital now." Ronan simply stood back, arms folded across his chest, with a sneer of derision painted across his smug features. "Don't bother," he spat venomously. "She's clearly just trying to stir up another scene. Pathetic even for you, Layla." White-hot rage cut through the pain as Sienna helped me up, glaring daggers at my wretched husband. "You heard the lady. She needs medical attention, asshole!" she shouted, somehow managing to steady my trembling form. "Are you really that much of a bastard that you're going to let your own child suffer?" His only response was a disdainful curl of his lip and a dismissive wave of his hand. and in that moment, any lingering shred of affection or loyalty I might have harbored for Ronan Jacobs dissipated into the ether. Through the tumultuous storm of agony and mounting rage, one thought rang out with piercing clarity. This petty, narcissistic monster could no longer be allowed to slither through this life unchecked. Not after everything he'd done, every reprehensible betrayal and cruelty I had endured at his hands. As Sienna half-carried, half-dragged me out of that wretched gala, the air thick with horrified murmurs from onlookers, I knew with every fiber of my being that there would be no quarter given, no more playing by his rules, operating within his corrupt boundaries. From this night forward, the delicate campaign of attrition would give way to an all-out scorched earth offensive. Ronan's downfall was no longer a question of if, but when. And I would be the White Walkyrie leading the charge over the charred remains of his pathetic existence until only ash and ruin remained. After the disastrous gala where Ronan so callously disregarded my health and our unborn child's well-being, any pretense of civility between us disintegrated into acrid dust. With Sienna's help, I had been rushed to the hospital, the doctors just barely managing to halt my premature labor. But that horrific night proved to be the flashpoint, the spark that ignited the wildfire of our intricately laid revenge plot. While I recovered under Sienna's watchful care, she began systematically executing the final phases of our operation, unloading salvo after salvo of damning evidence, whistleblower accounts, and criminal documentation onto the appropriate channels. Authorities, journalists, corporate watchdogs, no stone was left unturned as she mercilessly exposed the staggering depths of Ronan's duplicity and criminality. The dominoes began falling rapidly after that, one by one, until an unstoppable chain reaction took hold. SEC investigations gave way to federal grand juries, which then triggered disastrous civil lawsuits and IRS tax fraud probes. What had once been a contained snuff operation ballooned into an all-consuming inferno that threatened to engulf Ronan's entire empire of lies. And at the center of that conflagration stood the man himself, eyes bulging with impotent rage as he watched everything he'd conned and swindled for decades up in acrimonious smoke. You meddlesome bitch, he roared, slamming his meaty fist onto the desk during one of his increasingly frequent tantrums. You've ruined everything. My life's work, our legacy. It's all ashes because of your insipid vendetta. I regarded him stoically from across the office, completely unmoved by his theatrics. You have no one to blame but yourself, Ronan. Your greed and hubris were your own undoing, not me. His beady eyes narrowed to slits as he rose from behind his desk on unsteady feet. Don't play innocent with me, Layla. I know you were behind this. All of this. He gestured wildly at the stacks of legal notices and indictments littering every surface, debris from the smoldering remains of his diseased empire. You and that venomous snake, Sienna. We simply exposed the truth you worked so hard to bury, I countered coolly. Did you really think you could run this criminal farce indefinitely without any consequences? Ronan bared his teeth in an approximation of a snarl as he closed the distance between us. Up close, I could smell the reek of cheap whiskey and nervous sweat wafting off his disheveled form, a pitiful shell of the formerly sleek, intimidating con man whose fear I had lived in for so many years. You arrogant little... His slurred insult was cut off as a tiny, mewling cry pierced the air. My newborn daughter shifting restlessly in her carrier beside me. I shot him a withering glare, squaring my shoulders protectively. That's enough out of you. Not another vulgarity in front of my child. I fixed him with an icy stare, letting the unspoken threat resonate. You've inflicted enough trauma on this family. For a long, tense moment, we simply stared each other down, the snarling, feral beast backed into an inescapable corner, and the predator calmly observing its final throes. At last, Ronan seemed to wilt beneath the weight of crushing defeat clouding his gaze. Damn you, he spat bitterly, slumping back against his desk with a dull thud. Damn you and that bastard child to hell. As if on cue, Sienna strode into the room, eyes flashing as she took in the tense scene before her. Everything okay in here? Shooting Ronan one final look of disgust, I turned to face my co-conspirator and gave a tight nod. Never better. Just tying up some loose ends with the soon-to-be former Mr. Jacobs. A wicked grin split Sienna's features as she regarded her disgraced cousin with undisguised glee. Well, don't let me interrupt the reckoning. By all means, allow me to join in verbally eviscerating the sniveling husk of this pathetic, arrogant worm. She leveled a mocking glare at Ronan. Go on, you gaping asshole. What other lies do you have left to try and peddle? Ronan simply glowered in impotent rage, clenching and unclenching his fists. The faintest mutters of denial and heated curses escaped his trembling lips, but it was obvious the fight had left him. His will, his decades-long charade of power and dominance, had finally been irrevocably shattered. Turning my back to his crumpled, mumbling form, I bent down to tenderly scoop up my slumbering infant daughter, cradling her against my chest as a fierce wave of protectiveness washed over me. She was my everything now, my sole purpose, and all that mattered in this miserable world. And in that moment, I silently swore to whatever higher power that may exist, that my precious girl would never have to endure the trauma of Ronan's toxicity or fall under the twisted clutches of his family legacy. The karma he had wrought through his lifetime of malice and depravity was his cross to bear, not hers. Come on, Sienna, let's go home. There's nothing left for us among the ashes of Ronan's ruin. I spared one last contemptuous glance over my shoulder at the wretched, sniveling husk that was once my husband. This one can stew in his self-made purgatory alone. With a curt nod, Sienna fell into step beside me as we strode from the smoldering ruins of Ronan's decrepit empire. Behind us, I could feel his seething gaze burning impotently into the back of my skull. But I didn't falter, didn't dare look back. There was nothing for me amid that scorched earth, only the bright future awaiting my daughter and I beyond the caustic smoke of karmic justice. In the aftermath of Ronan's spectacular downfall, the shockwaves rippled through every facet of our lives. The legal and financial fallout had left his family's empire in irreparable ruin. Corporate entities dissolved, assets seized, reputations permanently disgraced. And at the eye of this hurricane of destruction stood Ronan himself, a bitter, sneering shell temporarily insulated by the last vestiges of his ill-gotten wealth as he licked his wounds. But even that protection was a rapidly dwindling facade. The incoming crush of criminal charges and civil litigation saw to that. I lost count of the visits from court officers, federal agents, and process servers darkening my doorstep, each one armed with another ream of subpoenas and legal filings squarely aimed at dismantling what little remained of Ronan's crumbling facade. His standard modus operandi of dismissive sneers and hollow legal threats gave way to panicked outbursts, increasingly erratic behavior, and even interventions from law enforcement when his rage spiraled out of control. "This isn't over, Layla," he roared at me through a haze of spittle during one such unhinged meltdown, eyes wild like a cornered animal. "I'll bury you in litigation for the rest of your miserable life. You'll never be free of me." Staring impassively back at him through the doorway, I didn't so much as flinch as I cradled our infant daughter protectively against my chest. "Is that so? Because from where I'm standing, it seems your options for retaliation are rapidly evaporating." "Don't get smug with me, you disloyal little cunt." Ronan's voice cracked with raw fury. "Everything I had, everything I built, it's all in ruins now, because of you. But I'll make sure you suffer just as badly before this is through. Mark my words." "Tell me, Ronan, do you honestly think threatening me is going to restore your dignity at this point?" I arched a challenging brow. "I've thoroughly dismantled any illusion of you being an intimidating presence. You're already living your worst nightmare, destitute and alone, unmourned and reviled for your reprehensible actions." He opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off with an imperious sweep of my free hand. "Enough with the hollow bravado. We both know that deep down, you're nothing more than a coward and a charlatan whose house of cards has finally collapsed under its own weight." Pausing, I allowed the weight of my next words to resonate. "I'd tell you to give my regards to your cellmates, but something tells me they'll be able to smell the stench of your vileness a mile away." For a fleeting instant, something akin to naked fear flickered behind Ronan's eyes. But the split-second glimpse into what fragile sliver of humanity he had left was quickly snuffed out, his ferocious mask of feral defiance slamming back into place. "You'll get yours, Layla. One way or another, I'll make sure of that," he snarled. No bitch takes everything from Ronan Jacobs and gets away with it unscathed. Is that so? A wry smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. We'll see about that. With one last contemptuous glare, Ronan whirled on his heel and stormed off, the once imposing figure cutting an increasingly diminutive presence with each passing day. I watched him leave unflinchingly, the weight of victory granting me a tranquil resolve I had once struggled to find amid his toxic shadow. As the fury of his exit faded into stony silence, my daughter began fussing softly against my chest. Gently shushing her, I nuzzled her downy head and hummed a tender tune until her squirms subsided into peaceful slumber once more. In that simple, serene moment, my purpose and drive crystallized into an inviolable truth. Everything I had endured, every wound and sacrifice along this tumultuous path, had all been for her. To build a world where she would never know the corrosive touch of Ronan's cruelty or malignance. A world where her limitless potential and soaring spirit would be nurtured, not bound in chains. It was then that I made an irrevocable vow, one that would guide the next phase of mine and my daughter's shared journey towards healing and vindication. I'm going to make sure that he spends the rest of his empty days withering behind bars where he belongs, I murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to my little girl's head. And in doing so, I'll cleanse every last vestige of his poison from our lives. You'll never have to know the person I was before you came along, sweetie. For far too long, the scales had been tipped decisively in Ronan's favor, my light perpetually eclipsed by the suffocating gravity of his toxicity. But in dismantling his vile empire through ruthless, strategic strikes, the karmic rebalancing had begun. Now it was time to reject his cancerous influence entirely and reclaim my destiny as the self-actualized woman and mother I was always meant to become. No more entertaining his hollow legal threats or humoring his pathetic machinations from the sidelines. No more relics from the life he had claimed for me through subjugation and fear. It was time for Ronan Jacobs to at long last reap the full consequences of his cruelty and deception, without mercy or compromise. Only then could my new chapter truly begin, a tale authored by my own steadfast convictions, free from the shackles of his arrogance and malice. As the first rays of dawn crested over the horizon, my path forward was bathed in brilliant clarity. There would be no steering from this inexorable road, no wavering amid the scattered ashes of Ronan's shattered reality. The metamorphosis was complete. Like a phoenix born anew from the purifying annihilation of his transgressions, my wings were finally unfurled and poised to carry us both into a future of boundless possibility. And this time there was no force in existence that could extinguish the radiant flame of justice and redemption blazing before us. The days and weeks following Ronan's disgrace blurred together in a whirlwind of activity as I systematically extricated every remaining tentacle of his poisonous presence from our lives. The divorce proceedings were inevitably messy and drawn out, colored by one bad faith legal maneuver after another, as my now thoroughly disgraced ex-husband grasped at any remaining shred of leverage. But flanked by an impeccably prepared legal team and emboldened by Sienna's stalwart support, his pathetic delaying tactics proved futile. In the end, the courts had little sympathy to spare for a man whose reprehensible actions had been laid bare so publicly. Within 6 months, the divorce decree was ironclad. Full custody of our daughter, a sizable monetary settlement from what meager funds remained attachable after all the asset seizures, and every last thread connecting me to that rotting family legacy unceremoniously severed. I was finally free from the insidious manipulation, the demeaning insults and abuse, the generational cycle of toxicity Ronan had tried so desperately to entrench us both in. As the last mote of legal dust scattered, I felt an unbearable weight dissipate, replaced by an electrifying surge of possibility and newfound liberty. This life, this miraculous second chance, was ours and ours alone to author. No longer would I allow Ronan's cancerous presence to dictate the boundaries of our realm. With my meager savings and the settlement funds, I wasted no time leaving that wretched city in the rear view, desperate to put as many miles between us and those harrowing memories as possible. A quaint but comfortable home in the mountains was my chosen fresh start, a place to breathe and find tranquility among the hushed pines and crisp alpine air. Sienna came with me on that maiden voyage to my new sanctuary, helping me settle in and bearing witness to the dawning of this new reality we had fought so tenaciously to manifest. "Not bad for your stakes of the winnings, all things considered," she remarked with a roguish grin as we lounged on the cabin's spacious back patio, our contented niece gurgling happily in her arms. "Just a consolation prize, really," I replied with a dismissive wave of my hand, lazily sipping a glass of crisp white wine as I surveyed the breathtaking vista of evergreen trees rolling off into the distance. "The true bounty is the regained peace of mind, something money alone could never buy." Sienna shot me an appraising look, nodding slowly. "You've come a long way from that demure, broken-winged sparrow Ronan tried so hard to keep clipped all those years. Not sure I've ever seen a phoenix's ascension up close like this before." "Just be glad you were on my side of the bonfire when this whole warpath started," I chuckled ruefully, twisting in my seat to meet her gaze. "I shudder to think how ruthless the retribution would have been if you'd been added to the list of co-conspirators." We shared a loaded look, one that spoke volumes to the depths of conviction and camaraderie that had driven our crusade of righteous vengeance over these past months. My unlikely ally had become an indispensable confidant and comrade-in-arms through the harshest throes of Ronan's sinister downfall. A true sister in every sense of the word. But enough about that narcissistic shit-stain. I'm over the moon just to be putting that whole cancerous saga behind me, Sienna declared with an emphatic clink of her glass against mine. "Here's to breathing that crisp, rejuvenating mountain air and never having to look over our shoulders again." "I'll drink to that," I said with a contented sigh, leaning back to bask in the warmth of the mid-afternoon sun filtering through the trees. For the first time in a long, long while, I truly felt at peace. Over the ensuing months, I steadily regained my footing and settled into my new normal of single motherhood, with Sienna's unflagging moral and logistical support by my side every step of the way. There were still days where I would be struck by sudden pangs of loathing or repressed trauma over all Ronan had put me through, phantom echoes of his scathing taunts and demeaning insults rattling like pinballs through my psyche. Yet with every passing week, those haunting whispers grew more faint, more powerless against the brilliant blaze of self-actualization and fulfillment illuminating my path forward. Gradually, steadily, I rediscovered the pieces of the woman I had once been, before Ronan's poisonous influence had so thoroughly leached her ambitions and self-worth down to empty husks. With my daughter as my unbridled source of inspiration and Sienna's sage guidance, the core pillars of my identity were steadily being rebuilt from the ground up. I dove headfirst into pursuing the high-stakes financial career I had abandoned when the Jacobs clan asserted their odious sway over my life's trajectory. The fire to establish myself as a singularly brilliant market analyst and consultant raged hotter than ever before. Within 2 years, I had clawed my way back into the cutthroat arena of high finance, rapidly establishing a hard-won reputation as a fierce, savvy negotiator with an incisive and unflinching market instinct. Seemingly overnight, my fledgling boutique consultancy went from a homespun side hustle to a force to be reckoned with on the national stage. "You've got a preternatural gift for this stuff, you know?" Sienna remarked in an odd tone one evening as I exited yet another lucrative teleconference, 6 figures richer for an hour's worth of counsel. "The sheer brass one's on you to step back into this shark's den after everything you went through." I simply shrugged, my gaze drifting over to where my 5-year-old daughter lay curled up in contented slumber on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. They tried to break me, and nearly succeeded, mostly because I allowed them to. I'll be damned if I squander this second lease on life by needlessly limiting myself again. The raw truth of those words hung in the air for a heavy pause as we both watched my little girl's peaceful rising and falling beneath her tattered blanket. Besides, I've got to set the bar high so this little munchkin knows just how brilliant and tenacious she can grow up to be, I continued wistfully. Her future is the only inheritance that matters to me now. The rest is just excess noise. Meeting Sienna's proud gaze with a resolute nod of affirmation, I felt the last vestiges of doubt and fear permanently slough off, like the molted skin of a transcendent serpent. What had once been shameful shackles had been meticulously reworked into brilliant new armor, steeled against the harsh realities that still lurked beyond this sanctum. Because out there in that tumultuous world, the specter of Ronan Jacobs and his ilk still festered. Venal, vicious aberrations perpetually locked in conflict with the strength and integrity I now embodied. And while his individual chapter had been scribed into ignominious history, that eternal crusade waged on in others. But I was more than ready to face those battles anew with a cleansed spirit and crystalline clarity of purpose, to uplift and cultivate that divine spark of potential until it erupted into an all-consuming wildfire, burning away every last mote of indignity and fear. No more poisoned births or anguished gasps for air amid that choking miasma of societal toxicity. Only the radiant promise of new dawns, to be ushered in by champions of change and retribution, unshackled from the anchors of oppression. Because on that day, standing at the precipice of our boldly reclaimed destiny, I was no longer prey, just the merciless apex predator, continually reborn in a blaze of glory.
Emily, can you tell us about your suspicions and the evidence you found? The prosecutor asked, his voice calm and steady. I took a deep breath and began. I started noticing strange symptoms after moving in with James. His mother's health declined rapidly, and she had unexplained bruises. I found similar symptoms in myself later on. What did you find in your investigation? He prompted. I hired a private detective who discovered that Linda was in severe financial trouble. We found evidence that she had poisoned her husband and was likely trying to do the same to me and James for financial gain. I explained, my voice trembling. Did Linda ever say anything to you that indicated her guilt? The prosecutor asked. Yes, just before I lost consciousness, she told me it was over for me, and that after I died, James would be next. She wanted everything we had, I said, my voice breaking with emotion. The defense lawyer stood up to cross-examine me, trying to cast doubt on my testimony. Emily, isn't it true that you and Linda never got along? Couldn't this be a personal vendetta? No, this isn't personal. This is about stopping a killer, I said firmly, refusing to be intimidated. As the trial went on, more witnesses testified, and the evidence piled up against Linda. The private detective presented his findings, and the medical examiner confirmed the presence of Warren in the exhumed bodies. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. When Linda was called to the stand, she initially denied everything, but the weight of the evidence was too much. Under pressure, she finally broke down and confessed. In the next court hearing, Linda looked at James with a mocking smile. Yes, I did it. I poisoned my husband, our mother, and I tried to poison you and Emily. I wanted it all, the money, the property. And look at you now, crying like a baby. James's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks as he heard her words. Linda, how could you? She laughed, a cold, cynical sound that sent chills down my spine. You were always so gullible, James. You never saw what was right in front of you. The judge's gavel banged, calling for order in the court. Linda was convicted of double premeditated murder and the attempted murder of me and James. She was sentenced to a long prison term, her mocking smile fading as she was led away in handcuffs. After the trial, I made the hard decision to divorce James. There was just too much pain and betrayal to mend. I went through treatment to recover from the poisoning, and I heard through friends that James was also undergoing treatment because Linda had tried to poison him too. I was in my new apartment, trying to rebuild my life. It was small but cozy, a fresh start away from all the chaos. I focused on getting healthy and finding some peace. One afternoon, I was having coffee with my friend Sarah, who had been my rock through all of this. So how are you really doing, Emily? Sarah asked, looking at me with concern. I'm getting there one day at a time. It's been rough, but I'm trying to move on, I replied, sipping my coffee. Have you heard from James? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, he's tried a few times to patch things up, I said, rolling my eyes. But I told him it's over. Good for you. After everything he put you through, you deserve better, she said, nodding in approval. I just can never get past the way he always sided with Linda over me. You can say all of your vows, but trust is the thing that counts in marriage. And when it's gone, you might as well leave, I said, feeling a twinge of pain. You're right. You need someone who has faith in you and never leaves your side, she said with a tight hand squeeze. I don't know, maybe it was just one of those days that I felt like going through some old photos and deciding what to keep, what to get rid of. They each reminded me of something, be it good or terrible. All that was heavily broken up with pings from my phone of messages smacking into us from James. It took me a little bit, but I finally did. Emily, I know how much pain I'd have caused you. Just one more conversation, please. The message read. I decided to be blunt with him instead. James, there's nothing more we can do or say. We both need to move on. Good luck to you, but I am done with this chapter. I hit send and experienced a weird mix of relief and it being over. Chapter IVI slammed the door on story of my life. At night I began to paint, finding a place of refuge and expression. This was good for me. It keeps my emotions grounded. I even signed up for a local book club and finally made several new friends. Each and every day became a moment toward recovery, as well as I was on a mission to develop a life of trust fund, happiness, and tranquility. It was part of my past and would always be with me, but the future had not been decided. Ready to take on whatever was coming my way, but this time I would be stronger, wiser. Ah, Sandra, they mean well. You know, they're just. Billy scratched his head. I'll talk to them. They'll chill out. Back in the kitchen, it felt like the final round of a cook-off where I was the only contestant, and the judges were out for blood. So Sandra, when's dinner? Billy must be starving, Lauren said, glancing at me like I was the help. Whenever the chili decides it's ready, I replied, but I kept my voice light. It's a tricky situation. Dinner landed on the table, and I scanned their faces. Mrs. Cherry stirred her food around, inspecting every bean like it held the secret to the universe. A bit different from how I make it, Mrs. Cherry finally said, That's code for nice try, but you're no match for me. Billy dived in though, bless him. Babe, this is awesome, right, ma? Lauren muttered, sure, and Mrs. Cherry just shrugged like she was agreeing with the worst food critic. After they left, Billy was slapping his belly, saying, It's all good. I watched the door shut behind them, feeling tiny, like I'm losing at a game I didn't sign up to play. The next time they popped over, it was the same old tune, like nothing had changed. I must have been dreaming to think a few words from Billy might turn the tide. Still, I asked him to talk to his mother about boundaries. I thought getting married was the hard part. Fitting into Billy's family is the real challenge. They've got their own idea of family, and I'm not in it yet. If this is what married life is like, count me out of the honeymoon phase. It was one of those days where the clock seemed to tick slower than syrup drips from a bottle. That's when my phone decided to ring. Glancing at the caller ID, my heart sank. It was Mrs. Cherry again. Sandra, her voice was stern, and it did nothing for my headache. You think you can just snatch Billy away from us? Her words stung like vinegar on a paper cut. I glanced over at Billy, hoping he'd at least flinch at his mother's tone. Nothing. He was glued to the TV screen, a statue with a heartbeat. Mrs. Cherry, it's not like that. We're just trying to set up some boundaries, I said, my voice thin. Boundaries? She fumed. That's just a fancy word for shutting us out. You can't do that to us. To me, he's my son. I blinked back frustration. Billy was still silent, looking like someone shrunk his spine in the wash. Listen, it's normal for married folks to want their own space. I tried to keep the edge out of my tone. Space? He's never needed space before you came, she retorted sharply. Each word chipped away at my patience. That's when Billy decided to speak up, but not to back me up. No, Mom, everything's okay. Sophia's not. She's not being unreasonable, I guess, he said, but his voice was like wet cardboard. Billy, I just can't believe this. First, Lauren tells me Sandra is making a fuss over our visits. And now this. Mrs. Cherry sounded hurt, and Billy jumped on that. Lauren said that. Billy turned to me, eyebrows raised as if I was the one causing trouble. Yeah, she did, and I think she's right. Family is family. Billy, you can't just turn your back on us. She pressed harder, knowing she was pulling him in. I saw my husband, the man I loved, deflate like a balloon 3 days after a party. The call ended with promises of another family meeting that felt more like a summit to discuss the terms of my surrender. After the call, it was as if nothing had happened. Billy settled back on the couch, resuming his championship in channel surfing. Mrs. Cherry continued her visits, each one a masterclass in thinly veiled jabs, and Lauren might as well have been a puppet master, always getting Billy's ear whenever she pleased. When word got back to me that Lauren was bad-mouthing me all over town, my blood boiled for a second, but I didn't let it get the best of me. I knew I had to handle this the right way. I waited for the right moment to deal with Lauren directly, and that moment came sooner than I thought. I found Lauren at the market on a Sunday morning, filling her basket with groceries. She didn't see me at first, but I walked right up to her, steady and strong. Lauren, I said. She looked up and rolled her eyes. What do you want, Sandra? We need to talk. It's about the stories you've been spreading. She snorted loudly, a smirk spreading across her face. Stories? I don't know what you're talking about. The rumors, Lauren. About me. Teresa's bossy, Teresa's this and that. Cut it out. She laughed, tossing an apple up and down in her hand. And what are you going to do if I don't? You think you can boss me around? I kept my cool. Listen, spreading lies isn't just mean. It's slander, and I won't stand for it. Lauren laughed again, louder this time. You're going to sue me? Get real, Sandra. You haven't got the stomach for that. People's reputations are at stake. I'm serious, Lauren. Keep it up, and yes, I will take legal action if I need to. The arrogance just poured off her as she leaned in close. You're in way over your head, little Miss City Lawyer. Going to take me to court. This isn't a joke. Lauren, I'm giving you a chance to stop this nonsense before it gets serious. She shoved her face closer to mine, a challenge plain in her expression. Bring it on, Sandra. Do your worst. With that, she spun on her heel, almost knocking over a display of canned beans, and left me standing there. Her laughter echoed through the aisle long after she was gone. I walked back home slower than usual, thinking everything over. Later that day, when my husband came back, I told him what happened. He was in the middle of taking his boots off and froze, one boot off, the other still on. You did what now? He asked. I told Lauren off. I threatened her with legal action if she doesn't stop spreading rumors. His face went red, then white. You couldn't just let it go. Why did you have to stir the pot, Sandra? I straightened up. Because it's not right, and I won't be walked over. Not by her, not by anyone. We were silent for a while, both lost in our thoughts. It was clear this was more than a little family squabble. It was a line drawn in the sand, and I had to stand my ground. He just stood there with that same lost puppy look that's becoming permanent on his face. I threw myself onto the couch, fuming. The fight might calm down for now, but Lauren is the kind of weed that keeps sprouting up. No telling when she'll start yapping again, and Billy, God knows if he'll ever find the guts to stand up to them. Right now, I just need to cool off and figure out my next move in this messy game they're all too eager to play. The whole mess with Lauren had me weighing my options like a pros and cons list in my head. I signed up for a life with Billy, not a daily soap opera with his family. With things going from bad to worse, the word divorce started rattling around in my brain. My thoughts changed in a dryer. Then, as if on cue, Mrs. Cherry, the town's self-appointed gossip queen and Lauren's godmother, called me up. "Sandra, dear," she chirped like a bird that spotted a worm. "We're throwing a little party for Lauren's engagement. It's happening at the Jens next week. We'd love to see you there." The tone of her voice was all fake niceness, the kind that practically screams, "I dare you to show up." After hanging up, I stared at the silent phone, thinking how this invite smelled like a setup. Billy was already on edge, and now this. I couldn't help but blurt out to him, "Guess who's got plans for us next week?" He was sitting at the kitchen table, his forehead creased like he was trying to iron out a thought. Who's scheming now? "Your sister's engagement party," I said. I said it straight out. "We're invited, courtesy of Mrs. Cherry." Billy's face went a shade paler, the crease steepening. "Oh hell, yeah, oh hell sounds about right." "So what's the plan here, Billy? Are we going to roll over and play nice, or what?" He was quiet for too long, and I'm not having it. Come on, spit it out. Billy finally looked up, his eyes serious. "Sandra, it's family. I think we should go." I crossed my arms, feeling the heat rise up my neck. "And let Lauren have a field day. I'm not their punching bag." He threw his hands up a bit too dramatically. "What do you want me to say?" "That's my sister." I leaned in, my hands flat on the table. "And I'm your wife." Does that not count for much these days? The word divorce was right there on the tip of my tongue, but I bit it back hard. Billy ran his hand through his hair, making it stand up like he'd just had an electric shock. "Of course it counts. Look, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place here. I'm a heartbeat away from losing my cool." "Well, guess what, sweetheart? So am I. I married you, now your constant need to please your family at my expense." Billy stood up, walked over, and took my hands. They felt rough, all work and worry. "Sandra, I love you. I do. And I hate that it's come to this. Let's not go to the party. You and me, we're a team, right?" It struck me then that this was the first time in a long while he picked me over them without flinching. It felt like finding an oasis in the middle of the desert. That night, the thought of divorce quietly tucked itself away. Not gone, but sleeping like a dog with one eye always open. But it was enough for me to catch my breath, to maybe believe that we could find some solid ground again. The place was hopping when we showed up, walls throbbing with too loud laughter and clinking glasses. I spotted Mrs. Cherry right away, sitting queen bee style at the biggest table, with that I rule the world look. There was Billy's sister Lauren, all grins like she won the lottery, and her guy Andrew, a deer-in-headlights type trying to smile. His folks were with them too, stiff and awkward, like they wandered into the wrong movie theater. Mrs. Cherry zeroed in on me the second we stepped in. "Sandra," she used like I was a 6-year-old not playing nice. "You'll be taking care of the bill tonight, right? To show you're one of us." I nearly spit out my drink. "What? Why me?" The table's all ears now, and the air's thick with that, "Oh, this is going to be good" vibe. Mrs. Cherry stretched her smile. "Tradition, sweetheart. The newest family member always shows their commitment. My jaw clamped shut so fast, I'm surprised I didn't chip a tooth. Commitment. That sounds a whole lot like a shakedown. Everyone perked up like they're hearing a whistle. There she goes, Mrs. Cherry, puffing up like I slapped her. Excuse me, that's uncalled for. Billy leaned in, his voice barely more than a whisper. Just do it, Sandra. It's not a big deal. A big deal. I whispered back, my voice turning into a snarl. No thanks. I ain't no one's piggy bank. He's hissing now, real quiet but clear. Pay the damn bill, Sandra, or we're through. I mean it. My laugh is as sharp as a snapped wire. You're not serious. He's all stone-faced and tight-mouthed. You think I'm playing. I stare him down. Divorce over this. He's all family first, Sandra. I'm shaking my head. And where do I fit, huh? It's showtime, and even Andrew and his parents are watching, their faces screaming. What the hell's going on? I push back my chair and stand, letting them all hear me. No, I ain't doing this dance, I say, my voice like a hammer on steel. There's shock on their faces, some whispering, some wide-eyed. Billy's going red, white, red like a stoplight, losing its mind. Mrs. Cherry looks like she might choke. I walk out into the night. It's black and cool and smells like freedom. I hear the door slam behind me. My heart's racing, but it's Billy who threw the divorce word, not me. The bar was nothing special, just another hole in the wall with dim lights and the smell of old beer. I had barely settled with a glass of something strong when my phone rang. It was Billy, and for a moment, I considered not answering, but I did. Sandra, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say divorce. Billy's voice was rushed and apologetic. Before I could even think of a response, Lauren's voice blasted through. You've ruined my engagement dinner, you selfish. The phone must have changed hands so fast my head spun. I could practically hear the venom in her voice. In the background, I heard Mrs. Jerry loud and clear. Why should I pay? He's your son. You pay the bill. I won't have my daughter marrying into a family that doesn't know how to treat people. The chaos from JPA's was spilling through the phone like a bad sitcom without a laugh track. People were arguing, and it seemed like nobody was keen on picking up the tab. I pushed away from the bar, my anger giving me a clear, calm voice. Lauren, chill out. Your mom's the one making a scene, not me. Sandra, hang up, Billy said, his voice a faint whisper behind his sister's ranting. No, she needs tow, Lauren kept going, but I wasn't about to play this game. I ended the call. The screen showed a string of missed calls and texts that I swiped away. They were probably all about the same thing, guilt and blame, the usual. I looked at the bartender. Another one, please. He nodded, pouring another shot without a word. Silence settled around me, except for the low murmur from the regulars scattered around. I tried to collect my thoughts. My phone screen lit up again, showing Billy's name. The guy just didn't know when to quit. I flipped the phone face down, letting it go to voicemail. It was futile to talk when the whole crew was going off the rails back there. A few drinks later, the door to the bar crept open, and in came a chill gust of evening air. But I didn't look up. It didn't matter who was coming and going. I thought about what had just happened and what it all meant. Here I was, sitting in a bar because my in-laws decided I was the bank, and instead of understanding, my supposed partner turned it into an ultimatum. I finally picked up my phone and typed out a text. Billy, we're done. Lauren can think what she wants, and your mom can deal with her own damn bills. I will not be part of this circus anymore. Just as I hit send, the phone rang again. This time, I shut it off. I was tired of the arguing, the demands, and above all, tired of feeling like I was alone in a partnership that was supposed to have my back. When the room finally stopped spinning and my head felt a little clearer, I knew what had to happen next. It was time to start looking forward, even if I had to do it on my own. No more games. No more being the scapegoat for a family that couldn't see past their own drama. I walked out of the bar, leaving the noise and the night behind. The air was getting colder, and the city lights were starting to blur into the coming darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was mine to take. What a mess that last evening was. The whole thing at the restaurant blew up bigger than anyone thought. The groom had had it up to here with the drama and ditched the engagement right then and there. You should have seen Lauren's face when he dropped that bomb. I can't believe it. No one saw it coming, least of all her. Then the mother-in-law lost it, screaming like a banshee. She was causing such a scene that the groom's family looked ready to call 911. She was yelling about disrespect and no consideration. It was pure chaos, like one of those trashy daytime shows where chairs start flying. Meanwhile, I was done. I filed for divorce and cut off all contact. I ignored Billy's calls and deleted his messages. The last I heard, he, his sister, and my former mother-in-law from hell are all holed up in the same house, probably driving each other crazy. As for me, it felt like I finally stopped holding my breath after years underwater. Life's simpler now, but that evening is still the talk whenever I bump into people from the old circle. It gets old, you know. So here's the update for anyone who still cares. I'm living my best, most peaceful life. I'm sitting in my usual spot at the cafe down the street from my place, the one where the coffee is strong, and no one asks too many questions. The barista gives me a nod, the usual he asks, like he's asking if the sky is up. Yep, I say. But those are my days, without the real lit and no pesky in-laws. When work is just work, it makes life a lot easier. I am entitled to my own free time and pleasures without pouting or whining. I collapse onto my saggy, thrice refurbished couch. The springs are gone, but I fit perfectly in it. I turn on the TV, and it's a crime show that catches criminals. I find it binding. By minute 30, the peace is what does me in. Not creepiness or loneliness, just peace. Breathe in, breathe out. No more eggshells to walk on, and no more fights to mediate between family members. This is living. Every night by the time I reach my pillow, it's with relief. No pat on the back needed. I know my value now, and I am starting to act accordingly. I take a bite of my sandwich when my phone buzzes. A text message from an unknown number. All I can guess is it's Billy seeing his way to text through a third party. I didn't even read it, so I deleted it. Not today, Satan. Not ever. I remember they used to say I would regret this, but nope. No regrets today, folks. The day stretches warm and slow, concluding with a glass of something smooth and an overdue book. A hard but fair heroine, all right. She kind of reminds me of someone equally as unsentimental. I'm Emily Clark. Chemistry has always been a hobby of mine. I have been a kitchen chemist since I was a very small child. I was addicted, much to my mother's annoyance. I went on to study chemical engineering in college after high school. They gave me my first job at a pharmaceutical company working in drug discovery. I loved it. I felt like I wrote the world a better place and was part of saving people, literally making medicines to save lives. I met James at a party thrown by mutual friends 2 years ago. He was even taller than me with sandy blonde hair and a smile that could brighten the darkest room. We hit it off right away. "Hey, I'm James," and then he held out his hand. "And you are?" "I'm Emily. I shook his hand and said, "Pleasure to meet you as well." We spent the entire night talking, and then we were dating just like that. James was charming, always had a smile and bright things to say to make me feel special. We started dating, and 2 years into it, we took the leap to get married. For us, a small wedding surrounded by close friends and family was enough. We got married, and I went to live in James' lovely family house. His mom, Margaret, lived with him in the big old house. James looked after her for several years, as Margaret was bedridden and became quite unwell. I was a naive newcomer, but James needed help. Have you thought about maybe getting her into a care facility? They could give her the medical care she needs. I suggested, trying to be as gentle as possible. James looked uncomfortable. I don't know. Mom has always wanted to stay here. She's comfortable at home. Yeah, but she needs more than we can give her. Think about it, okay. I pressed a bit, hoping he'd see reason. The next day, Linda, James's sister, came over. Linda was a piece of work. She was always on edge, always finding something to complain about. She had recently lost her husband, who was much older and had left her a good amount of money. Linda and I had never really hit it off. "James, what's this I hear about putting Mom in a home?" Linda snapped as soon as she walked in. "I just mentioned it as an option," I said, trying to stay calm. "Well, it's not happening. Mom will stay here until the end," Linda said firmly, glaring at me. I decided it was best to drop the subject, especially with Linda being so against it. Besides, she was still mourning her husband, and I didn't want to add to her stress. But dealing with Linda wasn't easy. She had a knack for showing up unannounced and making everything more difficult. She never liked me and made it clear whenever she had the chance. One evening, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. I was making a simple chicken dish with some vegetables, something easy but tasty. Linda walked in without knocking, as usual. "Emily, you're cooking again," she said, wrinkling her nose. "You know Mom liked her food with real flavor, not this bland stuff." "Good evening to you too, Linda," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm making what I can with what we have." "Well, it's not enough. Maybe you should try a little harder," she snapped. I bit my tongue, not wanting to start a fight. James walked in at that moment, sensing the tension. "Hey, what's going on here?" he asked, looking between us. "James, your wife here thinks bland chicken is what Mom would want." I told her Mom liked her food with flavor. Linda huffed and walked out of the kitchen. James looked at me, clearly frustrated. "Emily, can't you just try to get along with her? She's been through a lot." "James, I'm doing my best, but she's always criticizing me. It's like nothing I do is ever good enough for her," I said, feeling the weight of it all. The next few days were tense. Linda continued to show up unannounced, and each time she found something new to complain about. It felt like I was walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set her off next. One evening, she came over and started criticizing the cleanliness of the house. "Emily, this place is a mess. Don't you ever clean?" she said, looking around with disdain. "I clean every day, Linda." "Maybe if you actually helped, it wouldn't be so hard to keep up," I snapped, finally losing my patience. "How dare you talk to me like that?" "I'm just trying to help," she yelled. "Help by criticizing everything I do." "That's not helping, Linda," I shot back, feeling the anger rising. "Emily, calm down," James said, stepping between us. "I'm Emily Clark. Chemistry has always been a hobby of mine. I have been a kitchen chemist since I was a very small child. I was addicted, much to my mother's annoyance. I went on to study chemical engineering in college after high school. They gave me my first job at a pharmaceutical company working in drug discovery. I loved it, I felt like I wrote the world a better place and was part of saving people, literally making medicines to save lives. I met James at a party thrown by mutual friends 2 years ago. He was even taller than me with sandy blonde hair and a smile that could brighten the darkest room. We hit it off right away. "Hey, I'm James." And then he held out his hand. "And you are?" "I'm Emily." I shook his hand and said, "Pleasure to meet you as well." We spent the entire night talking, and then we were dating just like that. James was charming, always had a smile and bright things to say to make me feel special. We started dating, and 2 years into it, we took the leap to get married. For us, a small wedding surrounded by close friends and family was enough. We got married, and I went to live in James' lovely family house. His mom, Margaret, lived with him in the big old house. James looked after her for several years, as Margaret was bedridden and became quite unwell. I was a naive newcomer, but James needed help. "Have you thought about maybe getting her into a care facility? They could give her the medical care she needs," I suggested, trying to be as gentle as possible. James looked uncomfortable. "I don't know. Mom has always wanted to stay here. She's comfortable at home." "Yeah, but she needs more than we can give her. Think about it, okay?" I pressed a bit, hoping he'd see reason. The next day, Linda, James's sister, came over. Linda was a piece of work. She was always on edge, always finding something to complain about. She had recently lost her husband, who was much older and had left her a good amount of money. Linda and I had never really hit it off. "James, what's this I hear about putting Mom in a home?" Linda snapped as soon as she walked in. "I just mentioned it as an option," I said, trying to stay calm. "Well, it's not happening. Mom will stay here until the end," Linda said firmly, glaring at me. I decided it was best to drop the subject, especially with Linda being so against it. Besides, she was still mourning her husband, and I didn't want to add to her stress. But dealing with Linda wasn't easy. She had a knack for showing up unannounced and making everything more difficult. She never liked me and made it clear whenever she had the chance. One evening, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. I was making a simple chicken dish with some vegetables, something easy but tasty. Linda walked in without knocking, as usual. "Emily, you're cooking again," she said, wrinkling her nose. "You know Mom liked her food with real flavor, not this bland stuff." "Good evening to you too, Linda," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm making what I can with what we have." "Well, it's not enough. Maybe you should try a little harder," she snapped. I bit my tongue, not wanting to start a fight. James walked in at that moment, sensing the tension. "Hey, what's going on here?" he asked, looking between us. "James, your wife here thinks bland chicken is what Mom would want." I told her Mom liked her food with flavor. Linda huffed and walked out of the kitchen. James looked at me, clearly frustrated. "Emily, can't you just try to get along with her? She's been through a lot." "James, I'm doing my best, but she's always criticizing me. It's like nothing I do is ever good enough for her," I said, feeling the weight of it all. The next few days were tense. Linda continued to show up unannounced, and each time, she found something new to complain about. It felt like I was walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set her off next. One evening, she came over and started criticizing the cleanliness of the house. "Emily, this place is a mess. Don't you ever clean?" she said, looking around with disdain. "I clean every day, Linda. Maybe if you actually helped, it wouldn't be so hard to keep up," I snapped, finally losing my patience. "How dare you talk to me like that?" "I'm just trying to help," she yelled. "Help by criticizing everything I do." "That's not helping, Linda," I shot back, feeling the anger rising. "Emily, calm down. James said, stepping between us. I didn't take anything by accident, Linda. This is serious, I said, glaring at her. Oh, please, you're always looking for drama. Maybe you should focus on your own problems instead of dragging everyone else into them. Linda shot back, rolling her eyes. Linda, this isn't drama. This is my life we're talking about, I said, feeling my anger boil over. Emily, calm down, James said, trying to step between us. Calm down. Your sister's accusing me of making this up, and you want me to calm down. I yelled, feeling the frustration bubble up. Emily, you're acting crazy. We can't keep doing this. We need a divorce, James said, his voice flat and final. Divorce? Are you serious? You're going to believe her over me? I asked, feeling the shock hit me hard. Yes, Emily. You're always stirring things up. I can't take it anymore, he said, looking away. Linda smirked, clearly pleased with how things were turning out. I felt numb as I packed my things, the reality of what was happening sinking in. I couldn't believe this was how it was ending. Linda watched with a triumphant smile as I left the house, my heart heavy with betrayal and disbelief. After leaving James, I rented a small apartment near my work. It was hard to move on, but I was set on getting to the bottom of this mess. I went over all the facts, and it became clear Linda was the one behind everything. She poisoned her husband, her mother, and tried to do the same to me. I hired a private detective, Alex, to dig deeper. I handed him all the information I had, including the results of my blood tests. Alex, I need you to find out everything about Linda. I'm sure she's behind this, I said, handing him this stack of papers. Got it, Emily. I'll start right away. Give me 2 weeks, he replied, nodding firmly. 2 weeks later, Alex called me. Emily, we need to meet. I've got some information. We met at a quiet cafe. Alex had a serious look on his face and a thick folder in his hand. All right, what did you find? I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. Linda's in serious financial trouble. She blew through all the money from her husband, and now she's got huge debts, Alex explained, opening the folder. I looked through the documents, feeling a surge of anger. So she's been killing for money. First her husband, then her mother, and she tried to kill me. It looks that way. She's desperate and dangerous, Alex said, his voice steady. I decided to call James and set up a meeting. James, it's Emily. Can we talk? I said over the phone, my voice steady but firm. What is this about, Emily? He asked, sounding wary. It's important. It's about Linda, I replied, trying to keep my composure. All right, come over, he agreed, his voice filled with an incomprehensible warmth. I pulled up to James's house, my heart pounding. I had everything ready to confront him about Linda. As I walked in, James greeted me with a warm smile, which caught me off guard. Emily, glad you came. I was thinking, today's our anniversary, he said, holding a bottle of wine. James, we need to talk. It's serious, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's hold off on that for a bit. Come on, let's have a drink. It's our anniversary, he insisted, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I hesitated but then agreed. All right, just for a bit. Then we need to talk. We clinked glasses and I took a sip, trying to push my anxiety aside. But after a few minutes, I started feeling dizzy and nauseous. James, I feel really sick. Where did you get this wine? I asked, gripping the table for support. Linda brought it from Italy. She said it's special. I've been drinking it for a while, he replied, looking concerned. James, this wine is poisoned. Linda's trying to kill you for the inheritance. Call 911 now. I managed to say before collapsing to the floor. My vision was blurring as I lay there, barely conscious. I heard the door open and Linda's voice. "What's going on here?" she demanded, seeing me on the floor. "Emily says the wine's poisoned. She's really sick," James explained, panic in his voice. "Poisoned? She's drunk and making up lies to turn you against me," Linda snapped, her voice full of venom. "I'll get a cold compress," he said, rushing to the kitchen. Linda knelt beside me, her face twisted with a cruel smile. "It's over for you, Emily. In a few hours, you'll die of hemorrhage. Then it'll be James's turn, and everything will be mine." I tried to speak, but my body wouldn't respond. The room spun around me, and I felt myself slipping away. The last thing I heard was James returning with the telltale sound of his voice, filled with worry and confusion. Then everything went dark. I woke up in the hospital a few days later, my body aching and my mind foggy. The room was quiet except for the faint beeping of machines. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision, and saw a nurse bustling around the room. "Hey, you're awake," she said with a bright smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over," I muttered, my throat dry and scratchy. "What happened?" "You've been out for a few days. Your husband called the rescue service just in time, even though his sister tried her best to stop him," the nurse said, shaking her head. She was quite the piece of work, that one. "James called even with Linda trying to stop him?" I asked, feeling a mix of relief and surprise. "Yeah, he did. Good thing too. The doctor said another hour, and it might have been too late," she said. Just then, the door opened and Alex, the private detective, walked in with a police officer. Alex introduced him as Officer Martinez. "Emily, glad to see you're awake," Alex said, pulling up a chair next to my bed. "Alex, Officer Martinez, what's going on?" "What happened with Linda?" I asked, my voice still weak. "Emily, you did it. You helped us neutralize a dangerous criminal," Alex said, his voice firm but kind. "A criminal case has been opened against Linda. We exhumed the bodies of her ex-husband and her mother. The examination confirmed they were both poisoned with Warren." "Just like me," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "Yes, the same substance. It caused internal bleeding leading to their slow deaths," Martinez explained, his tone serious. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I was lying there crying with relief, listening to everything they were telling me. The nightmare was finally over. "Emily, you were incredibly brave to come forward with all this. You saved lives by exposing Linda," Alex said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder as the nurse continued her checks. Alex and Officer Martinez discussed the next steps in Linda's case. I listened, feeling a sense of closure, but also a deep sadness about James. "Emily, if you need anything, don't hesitate to call," Martinez said as they prepared to leave. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate everything you've done," I said, grateful for their support. As they left the room, I lay back on the pillows, staring at the ceiling. The relief of knowing Linda was caught was overwhelming, but the uncertainty about James left me feeling hollow. I knew it would take time to heal both physically and emotionally. But with Linda out of the picture, I had a chance to rebuild my life one step at a time. The day of the trial was nerve-wracking. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding, knowing I'd have to face Linda and tell the world what she had done. James was there too, but his face was a mask of doubt and confusion. He still didn't believe that his sister was guilty, even though the evidence showed she tried to poison him as well. As we waited for the trial to begin, James turned to me, his voice low and tense. "Emily, I can't believe Linda would do something like this. It feels like you're just out for revenge." His words cut deep. I couldn't understand his blind love for Linda, even with all the evidence against her. When the trial started, the prosecutor laid out the case, detailing Linda's actions and the evidence we had gathered. I was called to the stand as a witness, my hand shaking as I took my seat. "Emily, can you tell us about your suspicions and the evidence you found?" The prosecutor asked, his voice calm and steady. I took a deep breath and began. I started noticing strange symptoms after moving in with James. His mother's health declined rapidly, and she had unexplained bruises. I found similar symptoms in myself later on. "What did you find in your investigation?" he prompted. I hired a private detective who discovered that Linda was in severe financial trouble. We found evidence that she had poisoned her husband and was likely trying to do the same to me and James for financial gain, I explained, my voice trembling. "Did Linda ever say anything to you that indicated her guilt?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes. Just before I lost consciousness, she told me it was over for me, and that after I died, James would be next. She wanted everything we had," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. The defense lawyer stood up to cross-examine me, trying to cast doubt on my testimony. "Emily, isn't it true that you and Linda never got along? Couldn't this be a personal vendetta?" "No, this isn't personal. This is about stopping a killer," I said firmly, refusing to be intimidated. As the trial went on, more witnesses testified, and the evidence piled up against Linda. The private detective presented his findings, and the medical examiner confirmed the presence of Warren in the exhumed bodies. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. When Linda was called to the stand, she initially denied everything, but the weight of the evidence was too much. Under pressure, she finally broke down and confessed. In the next court hearing, Linda looked at James with a mocking smile. "Yes, I did it. I poisoned my husband, our mother, and I tried to poison you and Emily. I wanted it all, the money, the property. And look at you now, crying like a baby." James's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks as he heard her words. "Linda, how could you?" She laughed, a cold, cynical sound that sent chills down my spine. "You were always so gullible, James. You never saw what was right in front of you." The judge's gavel banged, calling for order in the court. Linda was convicted of double premeditated murder and the attempted murder of me and James. She was sentenced to a long prison term, her mocking smile fading as she was led away in handcuffs. After the trial, I made the hard decision to divorce James. There was just too much pain and betrayal to mend. I went through treatment to recover from the poisoning, and I heard through friends that James was also undergoing treatment because Linda had tried to poison him too. I was in my new apartment, trying to rebuild my life. It was small but cozy, a fresh start away from all the chaos. I focused on getting healthy and finding some peace. One afternoon, I was having coffee with my friend Sarah, who had been my rock through all of this. "So how are you really doing, Emily?" Sarah asked, looking at me with concern. "I'm getting there, one day at a time. It's been rough, but I'm trying to move on," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Have you heard from James?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, he's tried a few times to patch things up," I said, rolling my eyes. "But I told him it's over." "Good for you. After everything he put you through, you deserve better," she said, nodding in approval. "I just can never get past the way he always sided with Linda over me. You can say all of your vows, but trust is the thing that counts in marriage. And when it's gone, you might as well leave," I said, feeling a twinge of pain. "You're right. You need someone who has faith in you and never leaves your side," she said with a tight hand squeeze. I don't know, maybe it was just one of those days that I felt like going through some old photos and deciding what to keep, what to get rid of. They each reminded me of something, be it good or terrible. all that was heavily broken up with pings from my phone of messages smacking into us from James. It took me a little bit, but I finally did. Emily, I know how much pain I have caused you. Just one more conversation, please. The message read. I decided to be blunt with him. Instead, James, there's nothing more we can do or say. We both need to move on. Good luck to you, but I am done with this chapter. I hit send and experienced a weird mix of relief and it being over. Chapter IVI slammed the door on story of my life. At night I began to paint, finding a place of refuge and expression. This was good for me. It keeps my emotions grounded. I even signed up for a local book club and finally made several new friends. Each and every day became a moment toward recovery, as well as I was on a mission to develop a life of trust fund, happiness, and tranquility. It was part of my past and would always be with me, but the future had not been decided. Ready to take on whatever was coming my way, but this time I would be stronger, wiser. Located in the rolling hills and winding stream of Huntington Town, I was far away from city life. The old house we lived in had wooden floors that creaked and narrow windows where you could see for acres. It was like a world of its own. My story started in the comfort of family love. Money-wise, my parents weren't rich, but I grew up in a family full of kindness and heartwarming wisdom. His hands, weathered from years of working in a small town as a carpenter, were rough, but he also had the gentlest touch. He was a father who did more than craft wood. He was an example of how dedication and humility move mountains. As a schoolteacher, my mother decorated our home with books and stories as she stirred the depths of not only me, but prepared big dreams. It was a small town life in our part of the world. In these days, people used to entertain by visiting their neighbors, and no event was more exciting than the physical spaced events of our lives. I loved this life. Little things made me happy. The smell of dirt after rain or crunching leaves under my feet, and waking up to birds gladly singing a fry in the first rays. I met James for the first time at a community library. Different from anyone I'd ever met. A metropolitan visitor who exudes sophistication while still retaining an approachable front. His family were pillars of the business community, their money and influence stretching beyond the city's towers. In a world full of pretentious dudes, I was secretly pissed off about it. But James and his just happy to be here smile news flailing around, like they knew their personal attitude were kind of adorable. Our initial conversations were cautious, like two worlds carefully getting to know each other. He talked about city life, the fast pace, endless opportunities, and dazzling lights. I shared stories of my town, the annual harvest festival, peaceful walks by the stream, and our close-knit community. In those early days, we often met at an old park bench by the lake where we would talk for hours. The lake, with its calm waters reflecting the changing colors of the sky, witnessed our growing connection, weaving our different worlds into one. Elizabeth, James said to me one evening. His voice changed with a vulnerability I had not seen before. I have always been surrounded by people who care more about wealth and status, but with you, I found a peace I didn't know existed. You show me a different way of life, one that's real and full of warmth. His words stirred something deep inside me. James, where we come from doesn't define us. It's who we are when we're together that matters. You've given me a new view on life, opening my eyes to dreams I never dared to have. As our relationship grew, James told me about his family, especially his mother. She was elegant but had very high expectations. He spoke of her with respect, but also with concern. She has her own ideas about who I should be with. I'm just worried about how she'll react to us. I reached out, taking his hand and feeling a slight tremble. "We'll face that together," I assured him. "Love isn't about backgrounds or expectations. It's about two people who choose each other against all odds." The date James proposed was simple, just like our love. No grand gestures, just a heartfelt promise of a life together. As I looked into his eyes full of hope and love, I knew this was just the beginning. The evening I was set to meet James's family, I was very nervous. Their grand mansion loomed large as we approached, a reminder of the different worlds James and I came from. James held my hand, giving me a reassuring look. "Just be yourself, Elizabeth. That's all you need to be." I smiled weakly, trying to calm my nerves. "I just hope your mom doesn't think I'm out of place." James sighed, a hint of concern in his eyes. "Mom can be a bit much. Just remember, I'm here with you." As we entered the fancy dining room, James's mother, a tall woman with a stern look, greeted us. Her eyes quickly scanned me, a flicker of disapproval crossing her face. "So this is the young lady who has captured my son's heart. Interesting choice." Dinner was elaborate, with dishes I couldn't even name. James's mother, ever the gracious host, offered me a plate with a forced smile. "I suppose these dishes might be a bit too sophisticated for your taste, Elizabeth. We can get something simpler if you'd prefer." I felt embarrassed but managed a polite decline. "No, thank you. I'm always eager to try new things." As the evening went on, her comments became more pointed. She eyed my dress, a simple but neat outfit, and continued to make subtle remarks. I had thought it was appropriate. Is that what passes for evening wear in your town? It must be challenging to find good clothes on a modest budget. James tried to change the subject, but his mother was relentless. "Tell me, Elizabeth, what do your parents do?" It's always fascinating to learn about different walks of life. I answered, feeling her judgment. "My father is a carpenter, and my mother is a school teacher." "Oh, how quaint," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Hard-working people, I'm sure, but I suppose they couldn't offer you much in the way of a financial head start." The meal continued with her taking jabs at my small-town upbringing, my parents' humble jobs, and even my salary, which she somehow knew about. Each comment was polite, but sharp enough to hurt. James was visibly uncomfortable, and his attempts to defend me only seemed to amuse her more. As we left, James's father, Richard, pulled me aside and offered a kind smile. "Elizabeth, you handled yourself well. Don't let her get to you. She'll come around." In the car, James apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. I didn't think she'd be this harsh." I sighed, feeling a mix of hurt and determination. "It's okay, James. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I love you, and that's what matters." That night, as I lay in bed, the sting of his mother's words lingered. But beneath the hurt, a resolve was building. This was more than just about fitting in. It was a test of our love and my strength, and I was ready to face it head-on. As the wedding day approached, the air was thick with excitement and growing tension. Shirley, who had taken it upon herself to oversee the preparations, seemed to find pleasure in belittling my ideas and choices at every turn. One afternoon, while discussing the wedding plans with James and his mother, the topic of the wedding dress came up. I had chosen a simple yet elegant gown that I felt reflected my personality. James's mother, however, had other ideas. "That dress, Elizabeth, it's so plain. Don't you want to make a statement on your big day? After all, you're marrying into the family," she said, her voice laced with a patronizing tone. James squeezed my hand under the table, giving me a supportive look. "Mom, Elizabeth looks beautiful in that dress. It's her choice, and it's perfect." But his mother was relentless. "Oh, James, let's be realistic. This is a high-profile event. People expect a certain standard. Elizabeth, dear, you should consider something more fitting of our family's status. I tried to keep my voice steady, though her words stung. I appreciate your concern, but I really love my dress. It's special to me. She waved her hand dismissively. Well, it's your day, I suppose. But remember, it's not just about you. It's about how you represent us, too. As the days went by, her comments became more frequent and hurtful. Marian criticized the flower arrangements, the menu choices, and even the invitations. Each remark was a subtle dig at my background and my inability to meet her high standards. James and I often talked about this late into the night. I can't believe she's being so difficult, James would say, frustration clear in his voice. I wish she could just see how amazing you are and how happy you make me. I would lie there in his arms, feeling a mix of love and sorrow. I knew it wouldn't be easy marrying into your family, but I didn't expect it to be this hard. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. My parents and I had worked hard to make everything perfect despite Marian's constant criticisms. As I dressed in my simple but elegant gown, I hoped the day would pass without incident. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and heartfelt vows. James's eyes shone with affection and promise as we said our vows. However, looming over the joyous occasion was the apprehension of the reception to follow, especially the speeches. As expected, Marian took the microphone, commanding the room's attention. The air was thick with expectation as she began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, she started, her voice loud and clear. Today we have gathered to witness the union of my son James with Elizabeth, a person from a different circle. Whispers spread through the guests, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. She continued, her words sharp and unyielding. While some may commend James for his charitable heart in lifting a beggar from the streets, we must be cautious. It's essential to keep our family's reputation and standards high, not let them be diluted by those who are clearly freeloaders, seeking to elevate their status by clinging to a family of higher standing. The room fell into a stunned silence. My parents looked at me, their faces a mix of shock and hurt. James's face was a mask of disbelief and anger. The guests, a mix of our friends and James's high society acquaintances, looked on uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. My heart sank and a deep shame washed over me. Her words were not just insults. They were meant to belittle and humiliate me in front of everyone we cared about. As she finished her speech with a forced toast to our future, the applause was hesitant and quiet. The room was wrapped in an awkward silence, the joy of the occasion spoiled by her venomous words. James stood up, his voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. This isn't what I wanted. His eyes were filled with love and sorrow. I looked around at the shocked faces of our guests, feeling incredibly humiliated. Her words cast a heavy shadow over what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. The tension lingered after James's mother's harsh speech. Then his grandmother, Mrs. Joyce, a respected and authoritative figure in the family, requested the microphone. Her composed demeanor and serious expression immediately drew everyone's attention. Good evening, she began, her voice clear and firm. I have something important to say. Elizabeth, you have faced unfair criticism today. Criticism that no one deserves, especially not on their wedding day. I looked up in surprise, and James beside me seemed equally astonished. Mrs. Joyce then turned to Shirley. It seems we have forgotten our own past and where we come from. Let me remind everyone here, especially you, that before you were the lady of this house, you were a maid working under this very roof. It was here that you met your husband. A hush fell over the room. James's mother's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock and embarrassment. Mrs. Joyce continued, her tone firm. So for a former maid to stand here and scorn someone for their humble beginnings is not only ironic, but deeply hypocritical. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The room was silent, every guest hanging on to Mrs. Joyce's every word. You, who rose from poverty, should be the last person to judge or belittle another based on their background. We should be proud of Elizabeth's integrity and strength, not taunt her for it. The guests shifted uncomfortably, and whispers began to circulate. Shirley sat motionless, the impact of Mrs. Joyce's words clear on her face. In this family, we value character over wealth, kindness over status. Elizabeth exemplifies these values, and I am proud to welcome her into our family. Mrs. Joyce concluded, her gaze softening as she looked at me. The room erupted into applause, a stark contrast to the earlier muted response. Shirley sat there completely humbled, her earlier arrogance replaced by a visible sense of shame. I didn't feel sorry for her, James whispered to me. I never expected Grandma to stand up for us like this. I squeezed his hand, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. She's amazing. The rest of the evening felt lighter, the air cleared by Mrs. Joyce's honest defense. Guests approached with warm congratulations and sincere smiles. I felt like they were all on my side, and it felt great. As we left the reception hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of confidence and belonging. Mrs. Joyce's words had changed everything, breaking the cruel plans of a not-so-smart woman. The days after the wedding were filled with unspoken tension in James's family. It all came to a head during a family meeting at Mrs. Joyce's house, where the air was thick with expectation and apprehension. As we gathered in the grand living room, Mrs. Joyce began without hesitation, her voice firm and unwavering. What happened at the wedding cannot be overlooked. The way you spoke to Elizabeth was disgraceful. She addressed Shirley directly, her eyes sharp. James's mother, usually so composed, looked smaller somehow, her usual confidence diminished. Joyce, I've already apologized to Elizabeth, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of defiance. It's not just about an apology, Mrs. Joyce retorted. Your actions reflect on this entire family. You've become accustomed to a lifestyle funded by the family's money without appreciating its value. James's father nodded in agreement, his expression serious. My mother is right. You've lost sight of what's important. Mrs. Joyce then laid out her decision, each word deliberate and clear. I've decided to cut off the financial support you've been receiving. It's time you start contributing to this family instead of just taking. You'll need to find a job and learn to live within your means. The shock on Shirley's face was evident. She turned to her husband, seeking support. You can't agree with this. She can't just cut me off like this. But Richard surprised her. I stand with my mother on this. You've gone too far this time. It's for your own good. Shirley's eyes filled with anger and disbelief, her usual poise crumbling under the weight of her new reality. James, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice steady. Mom, Grandma's decision is harsh, but it's fair. You need to understand the impact of your words and actions. I sat there watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of sympathy and relief. James squeezed my hand under the table, silently supporting me. The meeting ended with James's mother in a state of shock, slowly realizing her situation. She was clearly used to living off her family, and the thought of working gave her a headache. I could barely contain a chuckle as we left. James leaned in close. I never thought I'd see the day when Mom would be at a loss for words. But maybe this is what she needs to change. I nodded, feeling a cautious hope for the future. Perhaps this will be a new beginning for her, for all of us. The family reckoning had been tough but necessary. It was a pivotal moment that promised to reshape the dynamics within James's family, hopefully for the better. The honeymoon was a welcome escape for James and me. As we walked along the sunrise beaches, the soothing sound of the waves provided much-needed relief from the recent family turmoil. One evening, as we watched the sunset, James wrapped his arm around me. "I'm sorry our wedding turned into such a drama, Elizabeth. I wish things had been different." I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "It's okay, James. It wasn't your fault. What matters is we're together now, away from all that stress." James sighed, looking out over the ocean. "Yeah, but when we go back, we'll have to face the reality of my mom's situation. It's going to be tough for her." I nodded, understanding his concern. Maybe this will be a chance for her to grow, to see things from a different perspective. We spend our days exploring and our nights talking about our future. The challenges we had faced seemed to strengthen our bond, reaffirming our love for each other. On our last night, as we packed our bags, James looked thoughtful. "You know, Elizabeth, everything that happened made me realize how important you are to me. I can't imagine going through life with anyone else." I smiled, touched by his words. "I feel the same, James. We've been through a lot, but it's only made our relationship stronger. We can handle whatever comes our way as long as we're together." As we headed back home, I felt ready to face whatever the future held, knowing we had each other. I felt a sense of peace. The honeymoon had not only been a break from the chaos, but also a time for us to strengthen our bond and prepare for the new chapter in our lives. We were returning to a changed reality, but we were doing it together, stronger and more united than ever. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with James by my side. Coming back from our honeymoon, James and I were unsure of what awaited us at his family home. The car ride was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts about the new family dynamics. As we arrived, the first thing we noticed was the absence of James's mother. Inside, we were greeted by his grandmother, Mrs. Joyce, who wore a knowing smile. "Welcome back, you two. I suppose you're wondering about the changes here," she said, her tone light, but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "Yes, where's Mom?" James asked, looking around. Mrs. Joyce took a deep breath, her smile still in place. "Well, after you left, Shirley caused quite a scene, demanding that I restore her financial support. When I refused, she decided to leave. She's now living in a small apartment, and from what I hear, is looking for a job." James and I exchanged glances, the news sinking in. It was a drastic change from the luxurious life she was used to. "And there's more," Mrs. Joyce continued, leaning in as if to share a secret. "Your father is considering a divorce. He's had enough of her antics. It seems like she finally pushed him too far." "Well, she brought it upon herself," James said, his expression a mix of shock and relief. "I can't believe it. I knew things would change, but this is more than I expected." I reached out, touching his arm. "It's a lot to take in, but maybe this is for the best. A chance for everyone to start fresh on a more honest footing." Dinner that night was oddly serene. The absence of James's mother was felt, but not in the way we had anticipated. The conversation was more open, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was a real sense of family. As we drove home later that evening, James was pensive. "I always hoped for a change, but I didn't expect it to happen like this. It's going to be a big adjustment for Mom," James said, breaking the silence. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "It's a tough situation, but maybe it's a necessary step for her to grow, and for your dad too, to find some peace. Sometimes change is needed for people to truly see what matters." The ride home was reflective, the quiet only broken by the hum of the car engine. We both sat lost in our thoughts, contemplating the new reality we were returning to. The family we left before the honeymoon was not the same one we were coming back to. It was a sobering thought, but in many ways, a hopeful one. As we drove through the familiar streets, I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. James's mother, who had always been a looming figure of control and criticism, was now facing a reality without the financial cushion she had relied on for so long. It was a dramatic shift, but one that might lead to her personal growth. Perhaps, without the comfort of easy money, she would learn to appreciate the smaller things in life and understand the value of hard work and humility. James's father, on the other hand, seemed ready to break free from the toxic dynamics that had ruled their marriage. His decision to consider a divorce was shocking, but also held the promise of peace and a fresh start. For years, he had been caught in the crossfire of his wife's demands and expectations. Now he had the chance to find happiness on his terms, without the constant strain of living up to someone else's standards. We were not returning to be with the same family. There was a whole other set of emotions that it brought up. Sadness for the pain and disruption, but a glimmer of hope towards something better. Change hurt, sure, but change was where the better life, our lives, lay in wait for us. We were not afraid of it. When we pulled back into our driveway, James turned to me with passion and love in his eyes. Whatever happens, we will face it with apprehension. Now we have the opportunity to forge something different, something better. This made me smile with a new sense of assurance. Yes, we will. We are no strangers to having been through hardship, and it has only made us tougher. So here we fight on with all of our might. It does not matter how hard it is, we are strong enough to go through it. Day 32. We got out of the car holding hands saying, "Bring it." I had no clue what was waiting for me except that whatever it is, I better be prepared, because with James there by my side to guide and protect me, we are going to make one hell of a team. We would face this new chapter side by side, taking everything it had to throw at us, and only coming out stronger on the other end. When Julie, my mother-in-law, called me after being only a week back from an overseas trip, I was shocked to the core. She was talking fast and said that we were going to get a $100,000 windfall, which purportedly we already had stashed away. It took a minute of confusion, and I tried to think back on any recent time that amount had gone into my savings. As a freelance jewelry designer, I have savings for emergencies, but rarely carry large sums of cash, and my bank card was with me the entire time. Typically, nobody else is able to withdraw that amount from my account. He told me to get it from the sideboard drawer, so I did. Frag me. People are just like, "You're fine, and you guys are doing good, so it's okay." Her words left me bewildered. Before I could ask another question, she thanked me sincerely and suggested that she might call on me for further financial assistance in the future while ending the conversation between us. I had a question mark about the missing $100,000 until my husband Larry came home and provided an explanation. 1 month later, Julie called me incessantly. I was just ignoring it at first, but then the ringing became so persistent that I answered. Naturally, the sight of over 50 missed calls on my phone was disconcerting. Julie's loud voice came on the line when I answered, accusing me of ignoring her. The way she said it made me feel as if I had wronged her by not telling, but to be honest, and without sounding extra petty or anything, that was just her making an assumption. The 37-year-old busy, child-wanting freelance jewelry designer called Polly, and my equally hard-working husband Larry. So he quit his corporate job and now helps me run a growing design business. We were married young, before I was doing much of anything in the field, and most everything had to come from the dependable paycheck Larry brought home. Today, as we have grown our business, it is no longer the same roles and responsibilities that dictate us. Even new challenges in the form of some family members twisting their perception about money unsolicited. By 34, I was in full swing with my own jewelry label, so it made sense for me to become more organized as there were long days ahead. My business began to grow, and Larry, who was doing moderately well at his company, just on the verge of getting a promotion, decided it was time for him to take a leap. He gave up his exec job and, in order to work with me, applied extraordinary management ability into our business. We both started getting contracts with massive international brands, and it completely changed our work life as well as personal life. However, success also brought new problems, notably with Larry's mother, Julie. She lived alone and saw our lives as luxurious, often asking us for money. "You always seem to be living so lavishly. I'm jealous," she would say. My job required me to attend product launches and dinners with executives, which Julie saw as fun outings. Her requests for money became more personal over time. "I'm going to throw a party for my friend soon. Can you give me some money for it?" she asked once. Even though it looked like we could afford it, keeping up our business image was expensive and full of obligations. We weren't living in luxury. These were necessary parts of our work. Julie, full of envy and sarcasm, didn't understand our expenses. Dressed up beautifully and eating at expensive places, she would say, "I envy you," despite my repeated refusals. Larry, being her son, would sometimes give in to her demands. If giving her a little money keeps her quiet, then it's worth it, he'd argue, finding it easier to appease her than have our work disrupted. But Julie's demands only grew. Recently, she wanted a new dress for an upcoming gathering. Just the other day, Julie came over and pestered Larry. "Wouldn't a three-piece suit work? We've been asked to buy clothes before," she said. There might be cheaper options, but what Julie wants is certainly not cheap. I explained to Julie that it was a fancy party and she couldn't be the only one in old clothes. She also insisted on a matching bag, which left us frustrated. To handle her frequent requests, Larry had set up a credit card in Julie's name for her expenses. At first, she overspent a lot, and Larry had to warn her. Even though he asked her to tell us before making big purchases, she kept spending too much. This constant demand for money left both Larry and me exhausted, trying to support family while keeping our business stable. I found an exquisite ring and couldn't resist buying it, though I regret not telling you first. Unfortunately, the bill was huge, Julie said. If spending is going to be this uncontrolled, maybe it's best to take back the card. "We just can't cover these costs," Larry said. The credit card was in Julie's name, but Larry was the one managing and paying the bills. Julie treated the card as if it had no limit, not realizing every purchase had to be paid for since the money wasn't coming directly from her. She kept using it freely. To control her spending, Larry set a limit on her card. Julie stormed into our home one day, frustrated. "What the heck? I couldn't pay for my shopping the other day. Why?" she complained. Larry explained that her excessive spending was straining our finances, so we had to lower her limit. "It's still enough, right?" Larry asked, trying to keep the peace. But Julie protested. "You two are still dressing up and going to fancy places. How's what I'm doing any different?" Julie thought our activities were just for fun. "It's part of our job, Julie," I explained. "If that's a job, then what I'm doing isn't any different. It's unfair that only you two get to have all the fun," she argued. While it's true that our work involves attending events in luxurious venues, these are professional obligations, not leisure activities. Despite her misunderstandings, setting a limit on Julie's credit card seemed to calm things down. Occasionally, Julie would visit and complain to Larry. But overall, life continued without major disruptions. As the year ended, an exciting opportunity came up. A foreign brand manufacturer approached me with a proposal to expand our business by moving overseas. This prospect thrilled me as it could elevate me to the ranks of top-tier designers. Larry, ever supportive as my manager, was all for it. "It's a chance we have to take," he affirmed. However, the idea of moving abroad brought a new concern: Julie. Given her past behavior, it was a real worry that she might insist on joining us overseas. The thought of living internationally was exciting, but dealing with Julie's demands in a new country was daunting. When we told Julie about our plans to move overseas for work that weekend, she reacted as we expected. "I want to come too," she declared, assuming our move would be a long vacation. Larry tried to explain, "We're going there for work. It won't be as leisurely as you think." But Julie was skeptical. "You're trying to trick me. You're planning to live even more lavishly there without me watching," she accused. "We're not moving there permanently. We'll come back after our work is done," I explained, trying to calm her concerns. Yet she retorted, "You're saying that, but you're planning to leave me behind, aren't you?" Larry and I were both exhausted by this repetitive argument. In an attempt to compromise, Larry suggested, "Okay, we can take you with us, but how about we pay for a week-long trip for you instead?" Julie perked up at this. "Really? Are you sure?" she asked. "We'll cover your flight and hotel, but you'll need to manage the rest," Larry affirmed. Pleased for the moment, however, the peace was short-lived. A few days later, while Larry was busy with the move arrangements, Julie dropped by unexpectedly. "Hey, Polly, Larry said I want to shop over there too. Can you give me some money?" she asked. "What about the card that Larry gave you?" I inquired, knowing she had a designated credit card for such expenses. Julie's face fell. "That's the thing. Larry finally took it away from me the other day," she admitted. It seemed she had been reprimanded for overspending and anticipating the challenges of managing finances with different currency rates overseas. Larry had confiscated the card. "I don't have that kind of money at hand either." "I can't give you money without Larry's approval," I said. "Can you ask him?" I suggested, knowing full well Larry's stance. "It's no use asking him." "That's why I'm asking you," she pressed, raising her voice in frustration. Julie did end up going on a 15-day trip abroad, which I assumed Larry managed to fund somehow. Upon her return, she called me brimming with excitement. "I'm back, and it was so fun," she shared, recounting tales of her sightseeing and dining adventures. "Though I hadn't asked and I overbought souvenirs and couldn't fit them in my suitcase, so I had them shipped here. Can't wait for them to arrive," she exclaimed. "That's nice," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral despite feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Thanks to the money you saved up, I had a blast," she exclaimed. "Saved up money? What are you talking about?" I responded, puzzled and a bit alarmed, having no recollection of setting aside money for her splurge. "I found it in your house's sideboard drawer," she said, claiming she took $100,000. I was stunned. Why would such a large amount of cash be stashed away at home, especially not in a drawer where anyone could find it? Confused, I confronted her. "I'm not sure what money you're talking about, but taking it from our house without permission is theft, even if you're family. Do you understand that?" Julie's response was unsettlingly casual. "That's why I'm telling you now." "My bad, I used it." "Consider it a post-factum report," she declared unapologetically. "I have no idea about this money, but if you took it and used it without telling anyone, that's a crime. And if it was something Larry had set aside for an important transaction, it's even more serious," I explained, trying to make sense of the situation. Despite this, There hadn't been any noticeable disruptions in our business finances during her trip. You too live so extravagantly, so why can't I have a little of that? Think of it as doing a favor for your parent. It's not a big deal, right? She rationalized, showing a sense of entitlement that was hard to comprehend. It's one thing to ask for help from your son and his wife, but this is not how you should behave after taking someone else's money, I replied, still in disbelief. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip, but I'll have to discuss this with Larry when he returns. Larry will understand. After all, I'm his only mother, and $100,000 isn't much to him, she assumed. All right, I'll pass the message along, I said, astounded by her lack of awareness. Later that evening, when Larry came home, he looked troubled. Polly, do you know about the money I left in the drawer? He asked urgently. 20 days ago, I withdrew it from my bank account, and now it's gone. Keeping such a large sum around, didn't you think it was careless? He questioned. I needed cash immediately for an urgent payment. Do you know anything about it? It suddenly clicked. Julie's earlier call, thanking me for the $100,000 and mentioning how much fun she had, made sense now. It was Larry's money meant for a crucial purpose. Larry, today Julie called thanking us for the $100,000 and saying she had a blast with it, I explained. I did understand what she meant until now, I said, piecing everything together. So it was Larry's money, but what was such a large amount meant for? I asked. Hey, if it wasn't for a business payment, we've been doing bank transfers for a long time, right? Why cash all of a sudden? I questioned, trying to understand the whole situation and deal with the consequences of Julie's actions. I knew it was Larry's money that had disappeared, but I didn't know the full story. Julie had taken the money without telling us, and I needed to understand. Why, I asked, I was puzzled by the situation. Larry began to explain. After he reduced the credit limit on Julie's card, she started secretly borrowing money from various sources, including consumer finance cards and credit cards she had opened without our knowledge. When Larry found out about her growing debt, he took away all of her cards and withdrew cash to settle her debts directly, aiming to bypass the banking system to keep our business accounts clean and maintain trust with our partners. This was also partly a farewell gesture, as we were moving abroad and wouldn't be around to manage such issues for her. Larry explained, I plan to handle her debts discreetly to prevent our financial records from getting complicated. A month had passed since then, and as I was busy packing for our move, Julie's frequent calls became hard to ignore. When I finally took her call, her voice was filled with desperation. Why aren't you answering my calls? I've called so many times, she said, almost in tears. I'm sorry, Julie. I've been caught up with the move. What's going on? I asked, trying to remain calm and give her a chance to explain her side. It's not just one thing. It's everything. They're asking for payments almost every day. It's too much, Julie confessed, her voice cracking under the strain. Have you tried contacting Larry about this? I asked, hoping she had sought his help first. He seems to be blocking my calls. I can't get through to him at all. Polly, you're my only hope now. Please help me, she pleaded. I realized then just how complex the situation had become. Julie's financial recklessness had led her into a maze of debt, and now, cut off from Larry's assistance, she was turning to me as her last resort. As we prepared to start anew in a foreign country, dealing with Julie's financial chaos demanded immediate attention before we could fully focus on our new beginnings. I was surprised by Larry's drastic approach toward his mother. If he had used the prepared funds to settle Julie's debts directly, the stressful situation might have been avoided. Now, Julie was overwhelmed with collection letters and constant calls from finance companies and lenders. It was like a scene from a dramatic film, something I never thought I'd see in real life. I'll talk to Larry, but I can't guarantee what he'll do. A son should help his mother in trouble, right? Please ask him for me, Julie pleaded at the end of our conversation. But with our business expansion coming up, our finances were already stretched. We couldn't afford to help Julie more, especially since she misused the money meant to settle her debts. When I told Larry about the call, he responded with a mix of fatigue and resignation. I had planned to sort things out before we left, but she squandered that chance herself, he said coldly. The money was originally meant to clear Julie's debts, but she spent it on a lavish trip, leaving no room for excuses. As Julie's calls continued, I followed Larry's lead and blocked her number. Part of me wished to help her. She was, after all, Larry's mother, but there was nothing I could do if he chose to detach from the situation. Meanwhile, our move overseas was fast approaching, and I still had a lot to pack. Amid the chaos, I discovered more troubling news. Julie had decided to sell her house to manage her debts. It turned out she had hidden even more liabilities than we knew. The total amount was so large that even after selling her property, she couldn't cover it all. Losing the family home where Larry had grown up was deeply upsetting. Our family home is gone. Are you okay with that? I asked, sensing his sadness. How can I be okay? But there's nothing we can do, Larry replied, his voice tinged with sorrow. Losing the house where he grew up must have felt like a great loss, much like how I felt when I lost my parents' house early in life. Amid these complex feelings and the heavy task of packing, we had to come to terms with the fact that some situations were beyond our control. We needed to focus on our future as we prepared to start anew in a different country. The bittersweet reality of losing a family home struck me deeply. I watched the situation unfold with Larry. Unlike my past experiences, Larry had not only lost the house where his earliest memories were made, but also his emotional sanctuary, all while his mother Julie was still alive. It's a hard feeling to describe, the mix of loss and displacement, especially under such painful circumstances. It's more than just losing a building. It's about losing a part of your history and the comfort of a place to return to that no longer exists. Julie now lives in a modest apartment and faces the daily struggle of managing her debts. She works part-time, which is tough given her age. Job opportunities for older people are limited and often physically demanding and less rewarding. This new reality is a big change from her previous life of unchecked spending and financial freedom. Though I feel sympathy seeing her struggle, it's tempered by knowing her situation is the result of her own poor financial decisions. Life teaches us that actions have consequences, and Julie's case reaffirms that financial responsibility is crucial at any age. In our new environment, the business is thriving beyond our expectations. The move overseas has brought our brand into the international spotlight with a flood of inquiries and offers from all over the world. Every new email and call brings potential for growth and collaboration, which is exciting but also very demanding. Success is thrilling but consumes our entire lives, leaving little room for anything else. Days blend into nights as we navigate time zones and cultural differences, trying to make the most of this golden opportunity. Despite the professional achievements, our personal lives are weighed down by our relentless schedules. The dream of expanding our family seems more like a distant vision, something we hope to revisit when the immediate demands lessen. Larry, who handles everything from logistics to client management, feels the strain deeply. As partners in both life and business, we often ponder our future and priorities, wondering how we can balance our professional goals with our personal desires. I gaze out the window of our tiny apartment into infinity. The neon lights melt into the night as do our lives. It is an optimistic, anonymous look that sharply contrasts the streets we used to know. This city, lively and remorseless, is now our paradise. It was a world away from the silent, simple life we had left. This is an exciting new life, but also a scary one. It is full of countless to-dos and questions that test us at every corner. As we figure out this next chapter, I am drawn to the gravity of what Julie has faced in disgrace from it a greater revelation about our family choices surrounding money. And it was a constant journey, the discovery of how our lives are intricately intertwined with each choice. The many decisions, sacrifices, and outcomes in the moment, well, those were molding themselves around our present reality, but also the legacy we would eventually leave behind. This is the view that promises mystery, a world without names, much different from what we were familiar with over there in our streets. This hustling, bustling city is now our home, but it is a far cry from the quiet we have known. Starting our fresh life is thrilling yet overwhelming, greeted at every corner with to-do lists and choices. In dealing with the reality of this new chapter, I think about Julie's experience and how our life choices inform everything. We are constantly reminded of the depth and breadth of what our actions have to do with life. As we enter this new chapter of our lives, we strive to achieve both success in work and sustaining the relationships that make us who else wealthy outside the world what some marker.